Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. Red sky at night, sailors delight. That's how they found out if they should sail away or what the next day was going to be about. They went by the red sky. Huh? What was it like to be a sailor? You know? So long distances they went all over the ocean. They were very brave and they were explorers. And you can imagine the conditions and everything they had to go through. Now, have you ever been on a ship? I've been on a ship a couple times, and right away I get kind of seasick and think, oh, I got to get off this ship. Even on a small boat, sometimes I get a little bit seasick. And so, it's kind of difficult, if you have motion sickness to be on a boat, especially a big ship. But in those days, it didn't matter. You'd have to get used to it anyway, wouldn't you? So when I think of the brave explorers of this time, first of all, we have to go back to the Vikings because they were one of the first big builders of ships that went across the Atlantic Ocean. And if you remember Leif Erikson, he actually came to America in Nova Scotia in the year 1000, a long time before 1492 with Columbus, huh? And then we talked about Zheng He from China. He sailed with huge, gigantic ships that were like cruise ships we have today for a short period of time, with hundreds and hundreds of sailors with him. And then we have Prince Henry the Navigator, who really sent a lot of sailors to go around from Portugal to go around Africa to find a route to India that way, although he didn't sail. And we'll be talking about some of those sailors in just a little bit, probably the next part of this lesson. So we have a lot of sailing happening. Then we have Columbus. Can you imagine? Can you just imagine? Columbus discovers this new world. And all these guys, these adventurers are like, oh, gotta go. There's a new world out there. There's a new world out there. We haven't gone there. No one's gone there. We don't know what's there. There could be like a magic fountain of youth, they say there is. Or maybe they could be like mansions of gold or streets of gold. Or who knows what else is over there? We need to claim it for our country. We need to claim it for Spain. We need to claim it for Portugal. We need to claim it for England. And we need to claim it for France. Yes. All those countries. They were all out to get their part of the new world, weren't they? Oh, let's talk about the sailors. When I think about sailing, I get a little bit queasy, but sailing back then was pretty common in certain areas, especially coastal cities. But what was the life of a sailor really like? Can you imagine? Well, the life was pretty hard, wasn't it? They had to go out to sea not for just a couple days, but for months, and sometimes for years. Can you imagine being away from home for years? And they had to perform hard work every day, cleaning and repairing things and handling the sails and pumping water out when the storms came and the rains came. They were always in danger of hitting icebergs in the north or hidden coral reefs in the south, or danger of pirates. Yes, there were pirates that invaded a lot of the ships that went out. And there were also danger in getting lost. Yes, they had to go by the North Star, and they had a compass, and they had to tell time by an hourglass. You can imagine that, And to figure out how fast the boat was going was pretty hard to find. And then they didn't have very good conditions, kind of filthy conditions, really. A few of the top officers, the admiral maybe, and some of the top guys there, they would have, have rooms or have a bunk room at least, or a cabin. But most of them didn't. Most of them just had to sleep downstairs and down in the hole, they called it, or maybe up on the deck. Who knows? they had low rations of food. So they had to eat only a little bit and drink only a little bit every day. And diseases, the biggest disease was scurvy. Scurvy was terrible. It would start in your gums, and your gums would start bleeding, and then you get sicker and sicker. And they never knew what this was. They knew it had to do with being out in ships for a long time, but finally they realized that it had to do with a lack of vitamin C. And so when they started giving the sailors each a lemon or a lime, they'd call them limeys, because they'd be sucking on limes, then they wouldn't have the scurvy, the problem. But they didn't find that out right away. So especially in Columbus's time, a lot of the sailors died of malnutrition, of scurvy. Would you want to be a sailor back then? I wouldn't, I don't think, Women didn't go usually. Usually it was men and boys. And some of the sailors were prisoners. They were made to go. And some were slaves. They were made to go. And some had a condition called impressment, where the government was impressing them to go, and they were like drafted to go, especially in the military. And they were to go no matter what. We know a lot of, you look back and there's a lot of tales of sailors being impressed, made to go. And they had to live that life, even if they didn't want to. Some, though, were looking for adventure, and some were looking for gold, and some were just brave, and they wanted to know what was over there. That's adventure, I would say. It's like if we knew there were people on Mars, and we decided, oh, we need to go there. There would be a few guys that would want to go, those astronauts, even though we know there's no one on Mars. But anyway, going back to the sailor. The life of the sailor may have been, for some of them, all they've ever known. Do you know they used to take 8-year-old boys and put them on the ships, and they would be the ones that would scrub the decks. And they were raised on the ship all of their life, and they knew no different. So they just grew up that way, and they always knew that they would be a sailor. And sometimes people, especially orphans, were put on boats, especially the young boys. The boys would be lookouts, and the boys maybe even be the ones that be climbing up the sails. Usually adults did, but they taught them how to do that, like little monkeys hanging on those ropes to move the sails. The pilot, he was the guy with the navigation. Then there was the boatswain. The boatswain was the one that adjusted the sails. And there was the gunner, and the gunner, you know what he did, took care of the guns and the ammunition, made sure everything worked. There was the cooper. What's a cooper? That was common. A cooper was the one that would repair the barrels of things to make sure the things that didn't have holes in it, and that maybe that rats weren't getting into the barrels of food that they had. The carpenter. We know a carpenter. He would actually build things and make sure all of the woodwork, things that were wood, were in order. They had to have carpenter full time on these boats. And then there was a barber, but the barber wasn't just the barber to cut their hair. The barber also was the dentist. He'd pull their teeth. If they had any problems with their teeth, they would get them pulled on there. And then he also was the surgeon. He would take out bullets and take out slivers and any problems that happened. He'd sew people up if they had a cut. He did all that, and he was a barber. And the captain would have to make sure that they had enough that everything was provided. They had enough water. They had enough water because they couldn't drink the seawater, and that they had enough food and medicine. And he knew he had to stop every once in a while because that their rations would run out. And so he was in charge in where they were going. And a lot of times, he was also in charge of if there were any guys that needed discipline. You see, the ship's captains had to enforce the discipline because sometimes there'd be chaos and rebellion, and sometimes they would want to take over the ships. These guys, some of them were prisoners, and sometimes this chaos would just go rampant. It would just, end up the ship would be taken away somewhere or destroyed because they would have like a little mini war on the ship. So the captain had to make sure, and so the punishment sometimes was pretty bad. And they had these beatings of cat o' nine tails, which they were leather strips, like seven leather strips with little metal pieces on it that they would be disciplined with. Wow, that would be terrible, I know. And sometimes they'd have to walk the plank, and sometimes they'd end up, if they murdered somebody, that they would have to take care of that situation there too. And it was a kind of a different place. Well, going back to the food, what kind of food do you think they ate? Well, they ate, a lot of their meals were stew. They made stew from the salted meat and fish. And then they had this stuff called hardtack, and they were like hard biscuits that they have to go, you put it in your mouth, but you have to keep chewing on it, or you have to put it in the stew to get it all softened up. And sometimes cheese, and sometimes they would have like ale or wine or something because they couldn't drink the water. The food deteriorated pretty rapidly, so they have to be careful because a lot of times on these boats there were rats and there were mice that got in, and worms and roaches. And so they had to make sure that these little pests didn't get into their food. And, there were the watches. They had to watch during the night. So all night someone had to watch. To see what was going on, how the ship was going. So they would have nighttime sailors and daytime sailors. Their pastimes, when I think of pastimes, you always see them. They love to carve, and they love to draw and sing and dance and play all these different games and dice games and board games, all these things. The sailors really got to know each other. And some of them agreed with each other and some of them disagreed with each other. Well, so when I think of the sailors now, it's not the same as they were back then. But back then, these sailors, most of them were very brave men. That's all I have to say.